I think the problem with medicine, here's another problem. It's too paternalistic. The doctors think that they're the only ones who can really handle returning patients back to patients. And actually, patients are pretty good at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in their 15 minutes, they're not going to be able to learn everything to relay this in a very efficient fashion. So I think we need to engage patients to have them take more responsibility so that they actually are part of their own healthcare.
Yeah.
And so I think we don't. Yeah, I think we get them more involved. I think it would solve a lot of problems that exist now.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
As listeners of this podcast know, innovators build our healthcare system, but they also disrupt it. My guest today, Mike Snyder, is a big believer that our care systems need a serious overhaul. As an author and principal investigator at Stanford and a serial entrepreneur, Mike has a lot of insight into the industry. He's founded or co-founded 9 health tech companies, and today serves on the board of many more. Notable among these companies include Personalis, SensOmics, and Protometrix. And today, he tells me why the healthcare system may be doing us all a disservice by not relying on us. Here's our conversation. Well, welcome, Mike. Thanks for joining me this morning or this afternoon, actually.
That's great to be here.
And so I'm so excited. I know Kim Meredith from SFGH Foundation connected us. So I've been really excited to learn more about the work that you do. And maybe we get to give us a little bit of a background of what you do at Stanford and what are you excited about?
Yeah, no. So what we're all about is big data and health. And so I'm a believer that the healthcare system's broken. After just hearing your story, I'm even more convinced. We think it's broken in many, many different ways, but clearly one of them is that we're very focused on treating people when they're ill, as opposed to trying to keep people healthy. And so what we've been doing is, my background is we've started looking at things at a systems level, first around biology, but now around health. And so we do deep profiling of people. We sequence their genome. We do deep molecular profiles, what's called the omes, so people's transcriptome and proteome, meaning all their transcripts and proteins and metabolites and even their microbiome, all these things we measure out of people. And these days we do a ton with wearables as well, these smartwatches and rings. And so but what's special is we're doing deep data, but what's extra special is that we're doing it longitudinally. So we actually follow people over time while they're healthy. And then we'll take different, additional samples when they get ill. For example, if they get a viral infection or other events that come along. And so we're trying to see if these new technologies like genome sequencing, deep data, and these days wearables, actually all the above, can be used to better manage people's health. And so with a project we started a number of years ago, actually it's 12 if you count it on me, it's 9 if you count most others. We've been following a smallest group, 109 people for all this time while they're healthy. And believe it or not, just from the first 3.5 years, we had almost half of them, 49, learned something pretty important about their health pre-symptomatically. So we would catch people with early cancer, 2 people with serious heart issues, and no one technology did it. Sometimes it was the genome sequencing predicted something was wrong. Like in my case, I was predicted to have diabetes and actually got diabetes during the course of the study. Another case was a heart condition was picked up from the genome. Other people was other technologies like imaging or some of the molecular measurements we were making. Sometimes it was the wearables. So no one technology did it. And so we're big believers that actually taking deep data on people is a much better picture. And in fact, one analogy I like to use is that basically, if you think about people's health as a 1,500-piece jigsaw puzzle, the way we do it today, we take about 10 pieces. And I think we should be taking at least 1,000 so you can get a much clearer picture of people's health.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of how we should think about how to take care of people when they're healthy so that we can have a heads up, and then so you can prevent them. And one of the things that you mentioned is that I feel like when I hear it, like, oh my God, how many things that we have to track, and how can you make it practical? Because, even wearing wearable, at some point, you can't wear everything. And then you'd be like, are we overkill? And is this really pragmatic? Does it make sense? And why does it make sense?
So to me, the answer is absolutely. You cannot have enough information, but it's how you manage and return that information that you're referring to. That is a big deal. You can't overwhelm people to just ignore it. But basically, so what I described is a research project. Obviously, we're in our lab, we do very, very deep data dives because we don't know for sure what technologies are going to be the most powerful. Some of them are very expensive, some of them are cheap. What's the best value per dollar, if you will? And so by exploring this at the research level, we can figure all this out, see which ones are doing what in terms of sensitivity for conditions, in terms of cost, in terms of ease, too, just being able to do some of these assays at scale. And so this project I described, even these 109 people, it cost millions and millions of dollars, believe it or not. We've learned a ton. And then what I'm a believer in, it probably relates to this podcast, which is that I'm a believer academics are great at research. We're really good at discovery and proof of principle. We're absolutely terrible about scaling. And so when we come up with something useful, we spin it off as a company. So I've founded 15 biotech companies now over the years. And as an example from this deep data dive, one of the first companies we founded was a company called Personalis. It's a genome sequencing company. And within a year, even though we had set up the Genome Sequencing Center at Stanford, within a year, my company was just way better than our lab because, again, a company digs in and does this. They just do it so much better. And they're quite phenomenal now. And so other companies, we spin off something called QBio that basically is doing deep data dive, but it's not the research project I described to you. Mm-hmm. It's actually a commercial version of this. It's medically relevant deep data, if you will, including, getting genetic information, including getting a lot of these deep molecular measurements, but they also do whole body imaging, and we can come back to that, but whole body MRI. And so the net result is that they're getting a deep data dive. And just like what I described for you for the research project, within the first year, they had uncovered a lot of things pre-symptomatically, like early pancreatic cancer, for example. They found in one person, which, you never find early. And they only did it because they're screening people early, pre-symptomatically. And they've had ovarian cancer. And a number of these things they picked up, again, through these deep data dives. And usually it's not just one technology that tells you something's off. It could be, imaging says something might not be right, but then when you combine it with the molecular measurements, like in our lab project, we noticed somebody had a large spleen, and then we saw some blood markers that were up and said, oh, something's off here. And then follow-up made it very, very clear that they had early lymphoma, actually. We caught this just by, again, doing these screens with big data on people while they're healthy. Mm-hmm. And so to your point that we're overloading people, you can bring the information back. The way we organize information now, if you've ever looked at your medical record from Epic, I don't know if you've done that, but it's a disaster. The information is not put back in any useful fashion. Even the doctor has to look at this and gets it back in a fashion that's not useful. I mean, they don't organize it and in a way that you or your physician can understand. And so we actually had some physicians look at what we were doing in QBio and said, why aren't we doing this? This is crazy. Because they organize it around themes like cardiovascular and things like that you can take a look at that and say, oh yeah, these things aren't quite right, or everything's looking great, you look healthy. It's very easy to see when it's all organized properly. And we don't do that now, which is amazing, right? Because I'm pretty sure couple of smart undergrads could do the whole thing, could reorganize that into a useful fashion. So anyway, that's another example of how the system's broken. We're so used to this existing system that we're not putting together a proper one. So I liken it kind of to like driving a car, where you have a dashboard on your car, you have sensors all over your car, and then when something goes off, they relay it to the front, and that's something you can keep track of. But you're right, you don't want to track every little sensor, every little moment, or it will overwhelm you. And that's how I see it.
And I think that's on the data front, on the dashboard side. But I think as a patient, right, if you're saying like you got the genome being tracked and your sleep is being tracked and also many other things being tracked, and like, how do you get there? Because the last thing you want to be, you get all the perfect data, but you spend every week in going to some office to get your blood drawn or get all those things, because that is not practical either.
I think that's going to change. First of all, I think wearables are going to become commonplace, or maybe it'll be implantables in the future. But you may or may not know, but 20% of the U.S. population, 50 million people, have a smartwatch or a ring, mostly smartwatches. And these are health monitoring devices. And you may or may not know, we set up an early COVID test actually around this. In fact, to back up the way we got into this is that I actually figured out my Lyme disease of all things from a smartwatch and a pulse ox. So this thing you put on your finger to measure oxygen levels. And it was clear in my case that my heart rate had elevated, my blood oxygen dropped, what seemed to be for no good reason. So I knew something was up. I was not symptomatic. And then later I got a fever off and on. But I was first alerted by my smartwatch and pulse ox. And later went to a doctor and he actually drew blood, said I had certain immune cells up and I had a bacterial infection. And he wanted to give me penicillin. And I said, no, I should take doxycycline because I suspected it was Lyme because 2 weeks earlier I had been in a place in rural Massachusetts where there's a lot of Lyme-infected ticks there. So bottom line is, he was prescribing suboptimal medication, and he did give in, but he wasn't happy when I first suggested this. I did warn him ahead of time that might be Lyme. Anyway, when I got back, I was traveling. When I got back, I took it for 2 weeks, but I was, in fact, Lyme positive, which we could test. And I'd given blood before that was negative, so I'd seroconverted during that time. So anyway, the point out of all that is that I self-diagnosed, and I think that's going to be part of the future. And if you think about medicine now, right, you are counting on a doctor. You make a 15-minute visit while you're healthy every few years usually. And when you're younger, it's even more spread out because you think you're invincible. Right. And it's just natural, right? I rarely went to the doctor when I was young. And so what's happening is that we're not getting measured when we're healthy. We wait till something goes wrong, and that can be catastrophic. So I think we need to be doing this. Wearables then turn out to be a pretty cheap way to do this at scale, I think. And I think medicine in the future is not going to be go visit a doctor for most things. I think it's going to be pricking yourself and mailing in tests, mailing in samples like little blood pricks and getting back a report. At some level, you'll be able to do it at home too with self-monitoring. And I can see that being done every week and in a very simple fashion to execute. That is, say, get up in the morning, much like you brush your teeth. Here's something worth thinking about. We brush our teeth routinely. We just take that for granted, right? That's preventative medicine for your teeth. And we don't do that at all for the rest of our body. And it's like, why not? So I am a believer we should have these devices that will help monitor us. And then if something is off, you don't freak out. You go in and get further tests to see what's going on. And I think it can be all distilled in a very simple thing. Your mirror can show you your health readouts, much like your car dashboard tells you how much gas you have. And
no, I think I always, I told my son this also. It's also, I think we don't like to think that we're going to get sick and we are all invisible, and then we go to the doctor when things go wrong. But I think, I felt like sometimes we need to be in tune with our body, and not everybody can be, and having these devices can help. I mean, I have a good example. One of our good friends, and he was one of the few survivors of pancreatic cancer because he detected early. And I think it helped because he's really in tune with his body, and he noticed really quickly. I think one of the things he was diagnosed when he was 60, and he lived until 94 actually.
Wow.
And so he always get invited to a pancreatic cancer society because there's not many survivors. And right. He found that first time he noticed on his stool looks different. And then he went to see the doctor. So,
really?
Right.
Wow.
So that's what I'm saying, that I think having these devices, it allow people who are not so focused on your body to kind of figure it out for you rather than you
Yeah,
keep
no,
looking.
and that only, I think, illustrates what I've been saying. So I would totally agree. And I mean, I think you hit a very interesting topic. One of the things we're doing through Bio, I mentioned, is whole body MRI. You go to any physician today and tell them about doing whole body MRI on healthy people. They say, absolutely not. That's a bad thing. Everybody has, nodules. And I say, well, that's not the point. Yes, everybody has nodules. Women have them in their ovaries, men in their prostate, 100% guaranteed. The question is, do you have any growing nodules? And the only way to know that is to do longitudinal samples, sample people periodically and see if any of them are growing. Because what happens now is if you get measured, say something pops up, maybe you do get a little bump somewhere, or you're not feeling well, and they do a scan on you, a whole body MRI, they will see nodules. They won't know if they're new ones that have just popped up because you just got cancer or if they were there all the time. So it's a disaster. Whereas if you had a baseline scan, you would absolutely know, I have 9 nodules that I've identified with a certain resolution of MRI, and they're there and they're not growing, and that's good for me to know. But if any one of them takes off, or if a new one forms that seems to be growing fast, I want to know about it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's also like a balance, right? Like the cost to do an MRI all the time and for make it as a part of your, I don't know, ongoing process. Mammogram for women of 15, they do it every year.
Yeah.
And I think also when you do MRI, people obviously you see the nodules, and different patients react differently. And I wonder, there's all this, and how do you manage that? How do you change that so that everybody can adopt?
It's managing expectations. It's being honest. I think the problem with medicine, here's another problem. It's too paternalistic. The doctors think that they're the only ones who can really handle returning patients back to patients. And actually, patients are pretty good at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in their 15 minutes, they're not going to be able to learn everything to relay this in a very efficient fashion. So I think we need to engage patients to have them take more responsibility so that they actually are part of their own healthcare.
Yeah.
And so I think we don't. Yeah, I think we get them more involved. I think it would solve a lot of problems that exist now. I mean, if you think about what's going on in diabetes, right? 9% of the U.S. population is diabetic, 33% is pre-diabetic. And those numbers are going up. And by the way, the pre-diabetic, 70% of those are going to become diabetic. So this is a disaster worse than COVID, because people down the road are going to have all kinds of health issues because of diabetes. And again, these numbers are just skyrocketing. They're by 2050, the numbers will be way higher. So we've got to get these things under control. And the only way to do it is get it under control while they're healthy. Don't wait till they're diabetic. And so we've got to start early. We've got to, work on prevention programs, in my opinion. Screen people while they're healthy and get them to take care of themselves and get them engaged.
Yeah, I think, I'm a big proponent of, I always tell this to my son, especially after my husband's situation, when he died of undiagnosed of heart disease, is that you need to advocate for yourself. You need to understand about, because you spend 24/7 with your body. So you know more what you feel, what you experience compared to the doctor who see you only for 5 minutes.
Right.
But I think you also rely on, not everybody are equipped to make that
That's what
advocacy understand it. So
I'm going to start with wearables. I think we can change the whole thing. You mentioned how whole body MRI is really expensive. That will become dirt cheap, and all this stuff's going to be dirt cheap in the future. You may or may not realize we're about to hit $100 genome, whereas it used to be $1,000 just recently. And so this stuff's going to be affordable for everyone. And then it's how do we execute it properly to keep people healthy? And one thing that's basically there right now are the wearables. I think they're not expensive. They can reach nearly the entire planet because of cloud-based computing. And what's kind of cool is, you may not know, but 3.8 billion people on the planet have a smartphone. The majority of people have a smartphone. And if you compare that with a smartwatch, you have a health monitoring device for most of the planet. Because as I mentioned before, we can detect outlying stress events from infections, things like that. So COVID, for example, I didn't really get into this, but we can actually pick up COVID in our real-time detection 3 days prior to symptom onset, a median of 3 days. And that we think is super powerful, right? You're not spreading then this thing around. And it's the system we've set up on a smartphone, and it's scalable to the whole planet. It's not specific for COVID. Other illnesses will set off these alerts, but also mental stress will set off these alerts. We think that's a good thing to learn too. I think we can ultimately separate out mental stress, by the way, from respiratory viruses and from Lyme disease. I think we can separate all these out with the kinds of signals we get from a wearable. And so in the future, we'll be able to do early detection of disease, I believe, quite easily with fairly inexpensive technologies like sensors coupled to our smartphone and cloud-based computing.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
And I personally think we'll be developing AI, personalized AI algorithms around people. We've done that for me. As you mentioned, we have a lot of data on me, and I am an outlier. You can't see me out there, but I'm wearing 4 smartwatches, and I use all kinds of devices. But yeah, and you don't need that in the future. In the future, it's going to be one wearable, like a smartwatch. Maybe it's an implantable, together with some home sampling, and that'll cover a lot of your health for early detection of disease, I think.
Yeah. Tell me, I remember when Fitbit came or now it's transforming, people always say, I know already how many steps I walk. It's almost like the people who are healthy, they track them. And the people who are not healthy, they usually are not, either because they're not interested or because they don't have access to it. And how do we address that?
Yeah, well, I think when Fitbits came out, as you first and correctly pointed out, people put them on in 3 months, they figured out their habits. Once people have pretty simple routines, and they know how far they're running, and they learn all that from the Fitbit, what their heart rate does, and then they throw the watch in a drawer. And there's studies that show just what I said. People wear them 3 months typically, and not longer. And what I think is powerful, and one of the reasons we're pushing this so hard, is that we can use these for disease detection and for following health and seeing if you're having a healthy profile. And I hope that will be transformative. And as to go back to the car analogy, you don't drive your car around without a dashboard. Why would you? You've got to know if you're running low on gas or speeding or the engine light's going to come on. But yet here we are as humans, which I would argue are more important than cars. We're counting only on our internal sensors, which are kind of slow compared to these, Fitbit monitors and things like that. They're much more sensitive. And so they can actually catch this stuff early. And I think as we show the utility of this, I'm hopeful that they will spread and become more powerful. We haven't talked about another kind of device, continuous glucose monitors, which turn out to be very eye-opening. I don't know if you've ever worn one, but they're really quite powerful. We have a lot of pre-diabetics and diabetics running around who are showing very, very strong glucose dysregulation. So they'll eat a meal and their glucose will spike out of control. And these devices are powerful, not only because they pick that up. We discover a lot of normal people are spiking just as much as diabetics, normal people. But we also could see what foods are actually doing this. And it turns out different people spike to different foods. Some people spike to bananas, others to pasta, others to nearly everybody spikes to rice, but some more than others. And so knowing this turns out to be really powerful because you can easily see what foods you like and what foods are spiking you. And you can take the foods you like that don't spike your glucose and try and avoid those that you like, but do spike your glucose and substitute something else. So now there are AI mechanisms, and I mentioned we spin off companies. Once you realize how powerful this continuous glucose monitors were, we started a company called January AI, and that's what they do. They actually put these on people. We have programs. The hard part is actually getting people to change their behaviors. We have some behavioral training programs, if you will, that are associated with this continuous glucose monitoring to actually try and improve people's glucose control. And we've just launched a company and set up our programs, and it seems to be going quite well. So I think this is going to be standard stuff in the future. These things are going to be dirt cheap. These continuous glucose monitors, they're very, very powerful. I'll tell you, if you do wear one, and you'll see what spikes you, it will modify your behavior just seeing this.
I think, instant information that you can do something about it. That make behavior change easier. Doesn't mean always a slam dunk.
drink a McDonald's shake and watch your glucose spike up in real time. I kid you not. It's pretty eye-opening. Yeah.
Yeah.
With one person, he was a New York Times reporter. He said, I thought I was eating the healthiest lunch ever. I had salmon on salad every single day for lunch. And then I, put on my glucose monitor. Wouldn't you know that my lunch was spiking my glucose through the roof? And it turns out it was the balsam vinegar sauce he put on top that had sugar in it, right? And once he saw this, he said, well, all I do is leave out the sauce, right? And everything's healthy. So, and that was true for me. I used to eat pulled pork sandwiches, which I really liked. And I watched my glucose go over 300. And I was showing this to somebody and said, Mike, everybody knows pulled pork has sugar in it and spikes your glucose. I said, I had no idea. In hindsight, all the stuff is obvious, but most of us don't know it.
And I wonder it tastes good.
Right. So
I think it's funny how we can change our behavior when the data is right in front of us, when we make the decision. I mean, I was just giving an example.
That's what we got to do for everyone, I think. Back to your earlier point, we've got to make the data in a form that people can recognize. And another example I like to use is a pathology report, right? You don't show the patient the stain slide to see whether there's a tumor or not. You give them back a simple report. That's what you give your physician who goes over it with the patient to say, here we did the stains, here's what we learned. And it's all presented in a simple, understandable fashion. And I think that's true of all these data. Yes, we can collect a lot more data. You can't flood people's brains with it, but you can present it back in a simple form. Look, we know you have metabolic issues, and here's what we learned by this profile. These things are off and these things are great. Maybe you can work on these certain things a little more, and these keep doing whatever you've been doing. It's working great.
Yeah. So I want to change a little bit, going to different. I mean, you mentioned about the company January AI. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so it's a glucose monitoring company. It relates to what I was just telling you. We started putting these devices on normal people and pre-diabetics and discovering that a lot of these folks had very severe glucose dysregulation. And so very eye-opening. And we said, well, we need to get this technology out to the masses. It's not that expensive. And usually, technologies are a little bit expensive when you first get involved. And so, they're going to get cheaper. And now there's a whole bunch of, there's two dominant players that make these devices, Abbott and Dexcom. But there are a lot of other companies that are in the space, and we'll see what comes out, but they're going to get very, very inexpensive. And what that means is that any person will be able, in Europe, they're over the counter. So that means any person can go purchase one of these things. In the US, you still need a physician, but I predict not for long. And so what that means is you can actually get one of these things, put it on you, and see what foods are doing what to you. And so we just felt that was really powerful. So I'm a believer that academics, as I say, they're good at proof of principle. They're good at discovery. They're no good at scaling. Companies are really good at taking something you do and just doing it really, really well so that it can reach millions of people. And so once we saw that, these monitors were very powerful for detecting glucose dysregulation and could be implemented into behavioral modification strategies, we basically felt this was important to see if we could, get this out to the masses and figure out the best way to do this. And so we spun off January AI to do just that. They used a lot of artificial intelligence to be able to figure out at a personal level what's going to spike you. And we bring in actually activity monitors and things like this as well. I know it sounds complicated, but we can do it all behind the scenes and make predictions about what's going to spike you. We have a nice food database it's called GIGL, a glycemic index, glycemic load, that gives you a sense about how much glucose is in each food and what it can do to you. And the combination, all these data forms we bring in, and we can make food recommendations to you. You do the continuous glucose monitoring to follow what's going on with your glucose, and we can make recommendations based on all the information we have and the information we collect on you. So you wear a monitor for 28 days, and we make predictions, and then try to get you to modify your behavior. A good example, I like this though. This is one that is kind of known, but it really, again, becomes eye-opening, is that we have you eat your favorite food and first thing in the morning, you'll watch it spike your glucose out of control because it always has sugar in it, or some sort of carb. And then you next day you eat your favorite food and you walk 15 minutes after you eat your favorite food, and suddenly you'll see that spike is very much suppressed, right? Very simple test, if you will, but it's very eye-opening to say, look, I can get my glucose down a lot by just doing a simple 15-minute brisk walk after I ate something. So these are the kinds of things you can do to try to, modify people's behavior to get better glucose control. And I'm not going to say that person's never going to get diabetes, but if you can push it off for a few more years, that's still valuable. And hopefully we'll push it off for more than a few more years, for a long, long time.
Right.
Yeah.
No, so you mentioned earlier that this is great. I think this is exciting. I think when people see what they can do to change their behavior, feedback. I guess it's all about feedback, right? You got the feedback. It's like, okay, this is wrong direction.
Well, I have some other ideas too, though, that will change people's behavior that we haven't talked about. I honestly think we need the main things that motivate people are money and family. So if we can get these technologies into, your health management system, meaning your payers and your insurers, who basically say, look, you'll get a discount if you get your genome sequence. I actually think you should get a discount if you get monitored better. I think then people would monitor themselves better, and you would be able to keep yourself healthier, which would save the payer and the insurer a ton of money. So I think, that's one way to get people motivated. Imagine you got a $10 a month discount to walk your 10,000 steps every day. I'll bet that would motivate a lot of people, especially people who are financially challenged, right?
I think there's a balance on that. I remember reading an article somewhere in Japan, I think, that they're really trying to control the weight of the population, and they provide a lot of that incentive. But I think there's some backlash probably because people got really annoyed. I think they have to measure their weights or something in order
so it's too invasive into their...
Yeah. But I think there was an incentive too, that if you lose weight, that you got this much of money.
Got it.
I think it's all about how you
implement
it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's true. What we're trying to do is make this, early on, everything we're doing is clunky. But I'm hoping as we go on, this all becomes more passive monitoring or minimal, right? You'll still need your little finger pricks,
right?
Get, droplets of blood and thing. But I think it can still be done in a very convenient fashion. And again, if the payoff is big, like your person who discovered early pancreatic cancer,
right?
Suddenly, I would assume that person will be sold on this for the rest of their lives. And I think that's to some extent true for the folks we're following, both in our research study and in our companies. I mean, we've had some pretty good anecdotes, like I mentioned, our early pancreatic cancer case. There's some other cases of cardiovascular disease that were a big deal. And some of these are found in young people. We had a young person whose genome we sequenced who had a mutation in it's called a cardiomyopathy gene, if you will. And it turns out he had a heart. We saw this, and his father died of a heart attack in his 60s, and aunt had one in their 50s. And when we saw this, we basically, talk with him, and sure enough, he's got a heart defect. He did an echocardiogram afterwards, and the bottom line was he did have it. So he's on medication now. Again, all caught pre-symptomatically, it's possible that saved his life.
Right. I think sometimes being a patient or at least some patient who kind of feel like they don't want to go to the doctor for every little thing because everybody's like, well, you're overreacting. But, again, by the time you see a doctor, it's too late.
It can be, yeah,
and
absolutely.
So I think having this kind of maybe easing their feeling about me being overreacting, having the device kind of, hey, look.
I think it can help. I know a lot of physicians worry, everybody's going to see these little blips, like all those red alerts we send off when somebody's heart rate gets elevated, which could be an indicator of disease, could be. But I actually think if you teach people, they learn how to manage it better.
Right.
I think we got to give credit to the person. I think they have more time to think about what's going on than the physician does. So I think they can manage their health better, quite frankly, than a physician. Physicians aren't going to go away, of course, and I'm not trying to put them away.
Yeah.
Trying to actually get them to bring in more data types to be able to just better manage people's health. But I can tell you, we caught someone with AFib in our study from a wearable. We caught someone with sleep apnea with a wearable. And these are very, very simple things to find, actually. That you would not have been found had we not done that. In fact, certainly hadn't been found.
Yeah. So I know we are short on time. I have one last question for you. You have spin off a lot of companies from your work in the lab. And how do you do it?
Oh, I don't know. It's all fun and it's all related. And again, it all makes sense. Our lab is doing a lot of research, and these really are research problems and trying to figure all this stuff out. And then when we see something that's useful, we don't go into this trying to start a company, although there's a few people in my lab come in and say, I want to start a company, and we'll work on that. But the main thing is we just do the science we're doing, which gets me very, very excited. And then when we want to see a way to scale it, and we think it's useful and want to scale it, that's when we form the company. To me, it's an obvious transition, and it's very satisfying. And I guess that's what keeps me motivated. I am a workaholic, but there's no better rush in the lab than a great result. And there's no better satisfaction than seeing something cool you did get out there to scale and try and help, millions of other people. And that's what we're doing with some of the companies I just mentioned. I really think they can transform. And this stuff we're doing is so cool. It really does belong to everyone on the planet.
So when you start to spin off the company, do you team up with other people who are running the company? Obviously, you're still running your lab with a lot of research.
Yeah.
And how do you go about that? I'm just thinking about our faculty here at UCSF who are doing the lab and how they can still do the research they love, yet be able to scale. And maybe you can share your little secret.
The normal way to do it is I do try and team up with a business person, ideally who has experience. And because I am a busy guy, as you point out, so they'll, I know how to make a pitch deck and I know how to write a business plan. But if I've got a business person on board, they actually usually do all that, the heavy lifting, and I can just comment on those things. And I'm there for the pitches. I'm there to help launch the company. And to be honest, I'm very active in all the companies I'm engaged in. There's a fair amount when you first launch it, but then it just goes into autopilot where once a week you're checking in for a half hour, an hour. It depends on the company. Sometimes it's every other week. And it's fun because it's spinning off of things that you're already doing. So it's keeping you abreast of the practical side of the same research you're doing in the lab. So I find it very satisfying that way. It's a little busy to launch stuff at first, but you'll see it's not like it's never a distraction. Mm-hmm. It's all part of the same, if you will, ecosystem. Right. And I think, there's a little historical artifact where people used to think academia and industry, they have to be separated. And I actually think we keep them too separated. I understand why we do it. But I do think there's some big advantages to being able to have all these working closely. And you'll see the best partnerships actually come out as partnerships between academia and industry that each has its strength, and neither can do what the other can do. So I think when you appreciate that and you get very excited about each side of it, like when we spin off a company, it's very easy to stay motivated with the company because they're just doing very, very cool things. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's a lot of fun. And so, so I guess because I enjoy it, I'm able to do it all.
You sounded really excited and passionate about what you do. And thank you for sharing a lot of the work and your ideas and your thinking for the future for improving the health of everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.